We don't always need to add more. And I think that's the trap that a lot of people fall into. Let me just grab that glutathione supplement and I'm good to go. Well, you're not addressing the root cause. The root cause is your lifestyle. It's really about taking a holistic look at your lifestyle, your habits, your preferences, what you can and can't get rid of. We got to weigh out the options for every person. It's very individual. It's the opposite of what we want, which is assuming that chemicals are innocent until they're proven guilty. We should flip that around and assume that they're guilty until they're proven innocent. We have built-in detoxification. Otherwise, we would be dead. However, with that said, those detox pathways are definitely getting burdened in a lot of people to the point where there's excess that the body cannot deal with. The supplement industry itself is not tightly regulated. People might think that the FDA is really cracking down on supplement quality, supplement purity, but this is not the case. And most supplements out there are not tested for purity. A lot of supplements are contaminated.
When it comes to our modern world, what are the biggest areas of toxin exposure these days?
There are several key areas that we need to look out for simply because our environment is not as pristine or clean as we'd hoped. The main areas that I want people to focus on are first, air quality, especially the quality of air inside your home, indoor air quality, water quality, as well as the foods that we're eating, the types, the quality as well, and also the products that we're bringing into our homes, personal care, beauty products, cleaning products. All of these exposures can add up in the long term and really have an impact on our health.
Okay, well, let's take these and go through a lot of them together here, starting with air quality. So, when we're talking about air, how does somebody begin? How do we know what's influencing the air in our home?
First, we can look at our lifestyle habits. So, number one, how often are we cooking? If we're cooking a lot, then that generates some pollutants in the air, especially if you happen to burn something, which is unlikely, but it does happen. They can release some types of harmful contaminants into the air and pollutants known as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are byproducts of the process of combustion. And these are carcinogenic. So they can come through the form of smoke. They can also be in vapors as well. So if you burn something, you smell the smoke, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's one. What we can do in that case is turn on the vent fan. If you have a hood over your stovetop that can vent outdoors, this is especially important because I've actually lived in a place that had a vent fan that just blew the air right back into my face. So it wasn't filtering or helping me at all. And if you're living in a situation like that, then I highly recommend opening the windows if you can and blowing the air out with a fan, just blowing the fumes away from you so that you're not inhaling them. Because even though they are a part of our daily activities, they still can have harmful effects on our lungs over time.
Okay, you mentioned burning food, but is this a good practice? I assume it is, even when we're just cooking and not burning the food?
Yes, absolutely. Because if you are smelling the food, then that is in a way volatilization. So anytime things are volatilizing, they're in your air, they have the potential to be inhaled. Not all of them are harmful, but if you just make these simple practices, such as opening your windows, turning on your vent fans, then you're already mitigating a lot of this issue. But if you want to take it a step further, even, then foods that are cooked in water, for example, steaming or boiling, those will not generate the same pollutants as grilling, frying, pan searing, what have you, would.
Okay, so we have the vent when we're in the kitchen. We have opening windows and doors to let that outdoor air exchange with the indoor air. Let's talk about air filters. How do you feel about those in a general sense?
Generally speaking, they have benefits, but it really depends on the other factors. So, for example, when I think of cleaning up my indoor air, I think first, what are the daily activities that I'm doing that are creating pollution? Is there a way that I can eliminate or mitigate or reduce them so that they are not having as much of an impact on my health? Second, air purification can be nuanced because in some cases, the air filters can be blowing around a lot of things like dust. So if you're not dusting, mopping, and sweeping regularly and you have a lot of dust in your home, then you're kind of just blowing it around in some ways. And that's not really helpful either. So it's more nuanced than it is, let me just say, everyone get an air purifier. That's not necessarily the case. Because if you are someone who is not even creating any pollution in your home. If you are someone that doesn't have a lot of synthetic textiles that are releasing microplastics, there's a lot that goes into this. So air purification is nuanced. Generally speaking, there's benefits.
Okay, so far we've mentioned cooking, creating particulate matter in the air. You mentioned clothing, and we know we need to be aware of dust and making sure we're cleaning on a regular basis. What other things in the home are creating toxic air?
One big polluter of our indoor air are fragranced products. So fragrance chemicals themselves are highly potent allergens. And a lot of fragrance chemicals are modeled or derived from plants and flowers and things like that give off aroma. Those also happen to be some of the most potent allergens known to man. So if you are someone that has asthma or any type of respiratory challenges, then you would definitely benefit by removing scented and fragrance products from your home. Because if you can smell it, like I mentioned earlier, that means there is volatilization. That means that these are becoming gases, they're becoming vapors, and you're inhaling them. That's how you're able to sense them. They're not all harmful, but again, if you are burning something, right? Burning, combustion equals pollution. Even if you're burning a clean beeswax candle made with essential oils, you are still releasing volatile organic compounds and particulate matter into your air.
Okay, well, let's go deeper into the candle piece here. If somebody wants to, still burn a candle and do it consciously, maybe have an open window by it or have it near an air purifier, so you're doing what you can and balancing everything out. Let's talk about the continuum of most toxic all the way to, you mentioned beeswax candle. How does that fit into the continuum?
The beeswax candles are on the better side of the continuum. They are based on the evidence and the research that I've seen, liberating the least amount of pollutants, but they're still releasing pollutants because combustion in and of itself is a polluting activity on a technical basis. The worst candles are petroleum wax with these synthetic dyes and also synthetic fragrances. There have even been studies published by the candle industry themselves showing how many pollutants are being released from these petroleum, paraffin wax, artificially scented candles. And they are orders of magnitude more polluting than these beeswax candles.
Okay, I would assume in this category, as we're talking about candles, we'd want to be cognizant of things like incense, or people have the plug-in air fresheners. Talk about those two categories and the toxicants that are coming from those.
Yes. So with incense, and I will illustrate a continuum there as well. So incense is even worse than your paraffin wax artificially scented candles, simply because of the nature of what incense is. It is designed to release smoke, and in the smoke is where you find the particulate matter. The particulate matter is what is highly toxic to our airways, but simply because they can penetrate very deeply into the lung and even cross into our bloodstream. So this is the number one top hazard when it comes to inhalation are these particulate matter, especially the sub 2.5 microns, so ultrafine particles. These are the ones that we need to look out for the most. And there have been studies showing that burning incense actually creates more pollutants and particulates than burning cigarettes, smoking cigarettes, which is pretty shocking to people because incense has been used for thousands of years for religious purposes, for, purpose, whatever your reason for using them is. They've been around for a long time. But are they still the same as our ancestors used or when they were created? Is it still the same type of incense? Unfortunately not. A lot of them contain synthetic fragrances that are not the same as what our ancestors used when these were created.
If you're enjoying this episode, let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much, and now back to the show. Okay, let's talk about the plugins. A lot of people are still using these. Talk about what's in those.
Again, the synthetic fragrances. With these scented plugins, I've actually seen some in stores that advertise made with essential oils. But when you turn the package around and actually look at the ingredients, I don't see any essential oils listed on the ingredient label. It simply says the word fragrance, one word, fragrance. And in case you're not aware, to anyone who's listening, that word can encompass up to 4,000, nearly 4,000 chemicals in that one word alone, any combination. So the International Fragrance Association, or IFRA, publishes a transparency list. This is the industry association for the fragrance industry. They publish their transparency list of any fragrance chemical that could be used in that one word fragrance or parfum. That's what you're finding in these scented plugins, in laundry detergent, dryer sheets, perfumes, skincare, cleaning products, you name it. Anytime you see that word fragrance, it is a red flag, because within that word fragrance and within the IFRA transparency list are known carcinogens
How do they
and
get away
also
with
endocrine
this? How do they
disruptors.
get away with this blanket term that contains carcinogens? It just seems crazy.
Yeah, it seems pretty shocking and surprising, but years ago, the industry was able to get trade secret protection over their formulations. So the FDA doesn't actually directly regulate fragrances or flavors that go into food. They are self-regulating, meaning that the industry regulates itself. That right there should raise some alarm bells in your mind, because is that not the world's biggest conflict of interest?
Yeah, it seems crazy. And when you mentioned the plugins, you talked about that experience you had of seeing essential oils apparently in the product, but when you flipped it over, you didn't see them. It gets me thinking about diffusing essential oils in the natural health space. A lot of people are doing that for different health benefits or just to improve the scent within the house. Is there any research showing whether or not that's healthy?
The health benefits of aromatherapy of essential oils has been extremely well documented. There are many, many studies on this, but used in a very prescriptive, very specific way. Not necessarily diffusing the way that a lot of consumers are doing, but more targeted, meaning directly inhaled. And then the physiological responses, maybe blood markers, things like that were measured in humans, right? In people. But this is different than diffusing into your home, where you are, again, diffusing and releasing, dispersing into a larger area over a longer period of time, these oils. And that has not been studied. And that is also a concern, because, again, if we don't have information and we don't know, there's no history on this, then we really can't say if something is safe or not for long-term use. People aren't diffusing for a day and then letting it go. A lot of people I've seen diffuse several times a day, continuously. The long-term health effects of this type of practice have not been determined.
What about wood burning fires indoors? People that are using that as a heat source throughout the winter.
Yeah, I understand this can be quite nuanced as well, because this is a historical method of providing heat in the home. But again, if we think of the context of when our ancestors and predecessors were burning wood to heat the home, think about what was happening outside their home is vastly different than what's happening outside our homes right now today. The environment is much more polluted than theirs was. So we can't necessarily compare apples to apples and say, well, my grandparents used to burn wood to stay warm in the winter. Why can't I? Well, what environment were your grandparents living in? What was their state of health? We we know for a fact that burning wood or burning anything generates particulate matter. It generates pollutants. So it isn't a healthy practice. But if that's, for a lot of people, might be their only option, then in that case, really look at the other habits you're doing. Look into eliminating the scented and fragrance products. Definitely using your vent fan when you're cooking. Maybe switching to boiling and steaming your food instead of frying and grilling. Maybe remove some of those other sources if the burning firewood is a non-negotiable for you. So it's really about taking a holistic look at your lifestyle, your habits, your preferences, what you can and can't get rid of. I think we got to weigh out the options for every person. It's very individual.
I agree with what you're saying there, looking at it as a whole and trying to do the best we can in different areas to hopefully lower the burden in a general sense. But that gets me thinking about the fact that there's all these new chemicals that are invading our body. How much of that has been researched, the interaction among those? So, not just looking at isolated chemicals and how they affect the human, but if we're taking in chemical from here, chemical from there, the synergy within our body, is there any research looking at that?
The general issue is that there hasn't been. That's the problem is our environment and our inner constitution, meaning our inner physiology, is so different among individuals that it's almost impossible. It's virtually impossible to draw any conclusions or make any generalized statements. And that is the issue, is that when we look at chemicals, especially from a toxicology perspective, we're looking at them individually, which makes absolutely no sense. Our bodies are the air, the food that we eat. There's hundreds, if not thousands of chemicals at a time. That's a complex mixture. So it doesn't make sense to think of it that way. And unfortunately, looking at toxicology studies on complex mixtures is extremely complex. And therefore, it's an area that really needs a lot more work. So no, there isn't a lot of work on that.
I guess the best we can do for now is find out different isolated chemicals that do have a negative impact. And again, as a general sense, just try and lessen those and realize that perfection is impossible in the modern world.
That's absolutely right. I am really glad that you mentioned that because oftentimes when we're looking to, let's say, clean up our indoor air, if we're trying to get perfect, that's not attainable. There's always going to be some variables, some source of pollution. We can't mitigate everything. But if you are looking to improve your health, then improving your indoor air quality is where you need to start, as well as your drinking water. That's something that I didn't mention when you first asked the question was, what are the areas that we need to look at? Drinking water is a huge one.
All right, we're going to get to drinking water here, but I want to stay on air for a second. And you mentioned early on one of the remedies if we're cooking, and I would assume this would extrapolate beyond that to freshen the air is to open a window or door. For a person who's saying, okay, but I live in a big city and I have pretty toxic air outside, how, in a general sense, and obviously this is going to depend on the area and where the person's living, but how often is the air inside worse off than the air outside where you'd want to do that?
There is actually some figures and statistics published by the EPA. They say that the indoor air can be 3 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. That's generally, right? And like you've mentioned, this is a very important issue to bring up. There's a lot of people who live in highly concentrated areas with traffic, urban areas where the air quality outside might actually be worse than inside. But how do you actually know if your indoor air is worse than your outdoor air? Well, it just really depends on several factors. Again, unless you have someone coming in to measure your air quality and the particulates in your air, you wouldn't really know. But if you want to mitigate them, then do the things that we've been discussing, which is get rid of the scented products, try to open your windows if you can, but in this case, you can't all the time. Maybe look into getting some indoor plants. Indoor plants have a lot of benefits for our overall well-being, but there were some studies done by NASA scientists back in the 80s showing that they can absorb some of these toxic volatile organic compounds. Again, don't use that in place of these other habit changes, but you can add them on as an adjunct, as a supporting mechanism, I guess you could say. People often think, I'll just get a bunch of indoor houseplants and that'll purify my air. Not necessarily. Depends on the size of your room. There was even a study that came out showing that you might have 100 plants or 1,000 plants, per area, which would be almost like a tropical rainforest in your living room. That's not really attainable for most people. So just bearing in mind that there are things that we should do to clean up our indoor air first. If you can't open your windows, then in that case, an air purifier could help you as well. But make sure you're dusting, mopping, and sweeping because these pollutants attach to house dust. That's something that a lot surprises a lot of people. So if you're living in a dusty home, then the dust is contributing to your health as well.
All right, let's come back to the plants piece. If somebody wants to use that as a piece of the puzzle when it comes to air quality, are there certain types of plants that you recommend that are better at purifying the air?
I've
You
seen
mentioned the NASA research. So is what specific plants are better for that?
I've seen some work on snake plants, and snake plants are very easy to maintain because they require low light, low water. They're almost immortal. Like, I don't even know if you can. It's I think it's really challenging to kill a snake plant. You can even propagate a snake plant yourself. So if you bought one, you can cut off a leaf and sprout roots and repot it. So you can propagate snake plants as well. That's my personal favorite. There's some research on that as well. They can absorb things like benzene and xylenes from the air. So this is something that is worthwhile to look into if you are someone who loves plants and let's say you can't open your windows, you live in a urban area.
Let's come back to air purifiers. I want to get into specifics. Somebody that wants to make that investment, given your expertise in this area, what kind of air purifiers do you use?
I use an air purifier that has both a carbon filter as well as a HEPA filter. So carbon can attract these volatile organic compounds. It can bind those because of the carbon matrix. And the HEPA filter will filter out the particulates. And you want both. Because when you're cooking, you're volatilizing, you're getting VOCs released there, volatile organic compounds, as well as the particulates. So you want to filter those out. And in fact, I have an air purifier that has an automatic ramp up feature when it's sensing increased pollution in the air. And it almost always turns on when I'm grilling or, pan frying something on the stove. But when I'm boiling or steaming something, it doesn't trigger it at all. And that makes sense. It's based on the research too. So that is just another confirmation. But carbon filter and HEPA filter, those are optimal.
How do you feel about mold impacting air quality? Is this something from your research that you see being a big problem? And how do you recommend people determine whether that's a factor?
Yes, mold is a big issue because it's often invisible. We don't even know it's there. It can be growing under your sinks, in your bathrooms, inside your walls. And unless you see visual signs of it, the only other way you know if you're being impacted is through your symptoms. And there's a myriad of symptoms that comes with mold toxicity and mycotoxin exposure. You can have respiratory issues, you can have skin issues, digestive issues. I mean, it basically impacts your entire body. So if you are dealing with if you've cleaned up your diet, let's say you've cleaned up your air quality and you're still kind of struggling, or you have some cognitive impairment that you've noticed some brain fog perhaps, then that could be another indication of mold toxicity. So definitely work with your healthcare provider to see if you have these signs of mold toxicity. And if so, I would highly recommend looking for a mold expert. So there are a lot of people online that talk about mold, but you have to really know who to actually reach out to. So a certified mold specialist is going to be able to pinpoint and target, and a mold remediation expert will be able to find out if you have mold in your home, how far gone is it? They have moisture meters and different methods for detecting mold in your home.
All right, let's move into drinking water. How does somebody determine what's in their water? And then what are the best ways to clean that up?
One of the easiest ways to determine what's in your water is to go on your municipality's website. So if your county, your city, your town, they should have a water report. If they don't, then that's an issue. Every municipality should have that at least. If they're providing water to you, they should be able to provide the quality report as well. If not, you can also go on the Environmental Working Group website, type in your zip code or your city, and it will show you the pollutants and the contaminants in your water.
Okay. And then once we find that out, what do we do to eliminate it?
Well, unfortunately, most water, at least in the US where I am, the water is fluoridated. We have a lot of fluoride in our water here, as well as studies have shown high levels of PFAS chemicals, which are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are fluorocarbon, Teflon-like chemicals. They're used in thousands of consumer products. They're basically everywhere in the environment. They're in our bodies. They're unavoidable at this point. They're in the water. So invest in a filter, but not any filter. And again, this also depends on your water. So if you've got certain types of water, then perhaps a certain type of filter would suit you better than another. And so that's something that we all need to do our own research on, is to figure out what's our water source water quality, and then what's the best way forward to remove as many of these contaminants as we can.
In a really general sense, though, is there one type of filter you recommend to people to remove everything?
Yes, reverse osmosis removes the most number of contaminants. But again, not every manufacturer has or will provide a water filter performance test. And that's what we should all ask for and look for, because even though it's claiming reverse osmosis, we need to know if it's actually working. But more often than not, they'll just have whatever water source that they are using for their test. Again, it might be different for your water quality, because I've heard people say that they live in an area with extremely hard water and reverse osmosis wouldn't work for them because it would clog up the filters. So in these special circumstances, we need to find the option that works best for us. But reverse osmosis in general is the one that works.
All right. And how do you feel about filtering shower water?
Filtering shower water is important because as we shower, most people don't shower with cold water. We shower with warm or even hot water. And in those cases, that can actually liberate more contaminants, especially volatilizing in the air. So you're breathing them in, right? If you're showering, it's hot, there's steam, it's volatilizing, you're inhaling them. Your skin is also wet, which can increase chemical absorption. So if you're showering in highly polluted water, you could be inhaling the vapors as well as absorbing contaminants through your skin.
All right. So we have shower filters. We want to filter our drinking water. What about for the whole house?
Yeah, whole house would be optimal if you can, And some people are not able to have a whole house filter. So then in that case, I would recommend filtering your drinking water and filtering your shower or bathtub, however you prefer to cleanse yourself.
All right. Let's move into food. How do you feel about organic, non-GMO? Like from a really broad perspective, where do we start?
Well, I think we first need to start with unprocessed food. So let's look at the difference between whole versus processed food. Processed food is making up most of people's calories in Western societies. We are eating processed foods, packaged foods. Um, these are empty calories, unfortunately, because they are devoid of a lot of nutrients. They've been highly processed. They can become much more of a risk to our health than a benefit, simply because when you're manufacturing things, the more you're altering the foods, the more you are adding another step of processing in, you're introducing more variables. And variables are not necessarily a good thing in this case, because that could equal more chemicals, more solvents, cooking them in a certain way. In, let's say you get those pre-cooked sausages, those more often than not were inserted into the plastic packaging raw. They say they're fully cooked, but those were cooked in plastic. So if you're cooking in plastic, then the plastic is in your food. It's melting into the food. So that's something more of a high level overview. Let's think of whole foods versus processed foods, minimizing processed foods, and then looking at whole foods. Whole foods meaning a single ingredient like chicken, beef, fruits, vegetables, things like that. Non-GMO versus organic. There is a difference. Organic means that synthetic pesticides and fertilizers were not used in the production of those foods. And there is benefit to that. And there are studies showing that people who consume more organic foods have a lower pesticide burden than people who eat completely conventionally raised foods that have been heavily sprayed with pesticides and herbicides. So there are benefits. But again, we have to look at it holistically from our own unique situation, because not every person can afford to eat entirely organic. And a lot of us, I think, could benefit from getting back into the kitchen as well.
All right, let's stick on the organic piece. For somebody you mentioned can't afford it or doesn't have access, how do you recommend cleaning produce if it's conventional? And is there any value in actually cleaning it to remove some of the pesticides and herbicides?
Yes, there is value in this. And this is something that I highly recommend regardless of whether or not you're eating organic or conventional. I do this for all of my produce. In fact, you could just fill up your sink with water and put in some baking soda or vinegar, not both together, but water with baking soda or vinegar, and soaking your fruits and vegetables for about 15 to 20 minutes. That's been shown to remove pesticides, a certain amount of pesticides, not all of them, but you're still better off than not doing that.
Okay, and when it comes to animal products, what do we look for?
Well, we would want to look for, again, organic as a starting point, depending on what your dietary preferences are. If you're looking at beef, then grass fed, grass finished would be optimal, pasture raised. Or chicken, same thing. Look for pasture raised chicken if you can't, organic chicken as well. But unfortunately, a lot of the meats and chicken that we get in the store, they have been processed and dipped, or how would you want to say it, washed in certain solutions that you might want to remove before you eat.
Talk more about
First,
that.
yeah, for the purpose of sanitizing the chicken.
Talk more about what that is and what that does to us.
Well, some of it can be some chlorinated solutions, bleach-like solutions that are not necessarily beneficial to us. So if you're able to remove some of those, and you're better off. If not, then as well, you're still better off eating that chicken, even if you don't remove the washing solution, than eating a piece of processed food. So I think there's a continuum. I don't want to dissuade anyone from eating chicken. That's not the point. The point is, get away from the processed foods, eat your chicken. But if you want to take your chicken to the next level, look for pasture raised chicken and then try to remove that washing solution off of there if you can. You can dab it with a paper towel, that will remove some.
Okay. So we have a couple specific special instances, one being the chicken. You mentioned the plastic in the sausages. What other foods might people be eating not knowing from the processing that there's certain things that are ending up in the food?
Yeah, for example, again, any type of processing at all is introducing more variables, more chemicals, more solvents, more substances, not only from the packaging itself, but from the manufacturing equipment as well, because manufacturing equipment is often cleaned with certain chemical solutions. It can also contain plasticizer chemicals. If there's plastic tubing, then you're getting plasticizer chemicals in your food. And there was a recent consumer report showing concerning levels of plasticizer chemicals in processed foods.
Crazy. The further we get into this, the messier it gets.
That's generally how things work, is the more processed they are, the worse they are for you.
What about supplements? What are we looking for there to make sure we're getting clean products?
Supplements are also a, let's say, a gray area for a lot of consumers. And I think that's because the supplement industry itself is not tightly regulated. People might think that the FDA is really cracking down on supplement quality, supplement purity, but this is not the case. And most supplements out there are not tested for purity. And the issue is that a lot of supplements are contaminated. So contaminated from, let's look at fish oil, for example. Fish oil is highly contaminated depending on the type of fish that were used to harvest the oil, the waters where they lived, how many contaminants were found in in the fish, oils themselves. Those get extracted. And so you're extracting not only the fish oil, but the contaminants right along with them, and they're not being removed. You can't really remove the contaminants. And then they're also not being processed and stored properly, so they become oxidized. And when you consume oxidized oils, these contribute to oxidative stress within the body. That is the basis for aging and disease. So instead of improving your health with these supplements like you think you are, you could actually be doing the exact opposite, which is hurting yourself.
Talk about, I've heard you get into the issue with hot coffee and tea in the cups when we go to a place and get a takeout hot beverage. What's happening there?
These paper cups are lined with a thin layer of polyethylene plastic. And what happens to plastic in the presence of heat is that it breaks down. Plastic melts. Not only that, those plastic lined cups are also processed with heavy metals. So When you add a hot liquid, such as coffee, that is high temperature as well as acidic, these two factors increase the leaching effect, the migration, leaching of microplastics and heavy metals from that thin layer of plastic into your beverage, which you are then consuming. And some people consume hot beverages out of these paper cups multiple times a day for several years. And the health effects of this are entirely unknown. In fact, the study that showed that there are thousands, tens of thousands of microplastic particles released from these cups within 15 minutes of introducing the hot liquid, that was only a recent study. And these cups have been around for decades.
And somebody could be making effort to go and get like an organic coffee, thinking they're doing a good thing, and then again taking in all these toxins. You didn't mention the lid piece. As we're drinking a hot liquid through a plastic lid, what happens there?
Yeah, similar effect. I didn't see any specific data on this, but if we connect the dots and we just think about what we're doing, the hot liquid sitting in the cup is is getting microplastic infestation in there. You're getting microplastics in there. And then as the hot liquid is passing through the lid, you could also be getting some as well. However, I would hypothesize that it would be less than what's already sitting in the coffee itself from the cup, because it's just the contact time is shorter. So the longer the duration of contact of that hot liquid with that plastic, that's going to increase the leaching, the rate of leaching. Whereas if it's passing through the lid, you could still get some plastic as well, but it wouldn't be worse than what's already in your cup.
I think a big challenge with a lot of this is we assume the people, the higher ups, are protecting us and looking out for us. And when it comes to things like the coffee, the chicken, the sausages, I'm sure that's just a few examples of many, many. We realize quickly that we're on our own and we need to do our own research and protect ourselves and our families.
Yes. So you bring up a really good point, and a lot of people believe that products are fully tested. Everything is perfectly safe for people to use and consume for decades of our lives without any incident. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The case is that industry can release products. The FDA, I mean, think of something like a paper cup. What would be the risk of a paper cup? It would seem pretty innocuous, but none of these food contact materials are tested. None of them. Cookware isn't even tested. It's only up to the individual companies themselves to do the testing. And it isn't until there is some level of concern, either at the consumer testing level or their academic studies that come out. But it's usually decades or years after these products have already been in use. So it's the opposite of what we want, which is assuming that chemicals are innocent until they're proven guilty. We should flip that around and assume that they're guilty until they're proven innocent.
All right, well, while we're in the food piece here, you mentioned cookware. So we need to be careful of the food we're starting with, like we got into already. But then what we cook our food in obviously matters. There's a lot of different types of cookware out there and a lot of different people marketing healthy cookware. How do we navigate that world? What do you recommend?
Cookware is tricky because again, we have individual preferences, budget, availability, accessibility. So it is also, with everything else, there's nuance to it. But again, cookware in general, what we want to avoid, number one, first and foremost, the worst type of cookware to get rid of now is nonstick cookware. Nonstick cookware is coated in, again, these PFAS chemicals that we talked about earlier. PFAS chemicals are used in thousands of consumer products because they are highly versatile. They impart a waterproof, a non-stick, non-stain, water-resistant, oil-resistant quality to products that just makes things virtually indestructible, just like the PFAS chemicals themselves. That's why they're called forever chemicals, because they stay around forever. They are so chemically stable that makes them extremely hazardous, because once they enter the ecosystem, once they enter the body, their rate of breakdown and metabolism is so slow. But companies are continuing to churn these things out and we're continuously exposed. So it's not going anywhere. They bioaccumulate, and that's really the issue. So nonstick cookware, the issue there is number one, it volatilizes when you cook. So you could be inhaling the vapors and the fumes. If you scratch a piece of nonstick cookware, which by the way is very easy to do, if you scratch the coating, it can release thousands of PFAS particles. So PFAS technically are considered a type of plastic. So according to a recent study, there was 9,000 microplastic PFAS particles released into your food just from a single scratch. And I myself personally have used a piece of nonstick cookware with multiple scratches. So who's to say how many PFAS particles I was ingesting? I have no idea before I made the switch. Next, if you crack the coating, then that number increases exponentially. So we really need to look out for that. That's two issues with nonstick cookware. The third issue is the environmental impact. The environmental impact, because once these coatings get scratched, they don't work as well. It's not nonstick anymore. Your eggs don't slide off. You don't, just have to rinse them with water and then, you're on your way. You have to replace them. They get thrown in the landfill. These things don't break down. That's why they are in our air, water, soil. They're in food. They're everywhere. So we need to first stop buying them and stop disposing of them. And then another issue is that you can get transfer of these PFAS chemicals from the cooking material into your food. And then once you scratch it, then the material underneath is exposed to your food. So for example, most nonstick cookware is aluminum coated Teflon, aluminum coated nonstick coated aluminum. And once those scratches happen, your food can come in contact with aluminum. Aluminum has concerns for Alzheimer's, increasing the risk of Alzheimer's.
Obviously, we'd want to avoid aluminum foil then.
Yes, if you can avoid aluminum foil, there are some use cases, right? For example, you're baking some chicken and you don't want it to burn, then covering it with aluminum foil can, help you prevent your food from burning. I'm not saying you have to run and hide from it, but routinely cooking on aluminum is not optimal.
All right, so what do we use?
Several options. My personal favorite, I love cast iron. Cast iron works very well for so many different use cases, but not all. So for example, iron can leach in the presence of acid. So we don't necessarily want to use lemon juice or tomato sauce in a cast iron pot or skillet. But for most cases, cooking eggs, meat, sauteing vegetables, you can use it in the oven, on the stovetop. You can take it, camping with you. It's very versatile, right? It's virtually indestructible. So if you can get into the swing of using cast iron, if you know how to season it and care for it, then it's a great option. And that's something that I've added to my kitchen as well. Stainless steel is another one. Stainless steel is widely available. It's lightweight. Most people can handle it. But again, you have to use it in a certain way to prevent the food from sticking. But once you figure it out, it's not difficult. But there are some cases where people can be sensitive to nickel, and stainless steel can leach nickel and chromium in the presence of acids as well. So if you're having issues with nickel, then you might want to look for nickel-free stainless steel. And that's something that you can look for. If you contact the manufacturer, you can find out that information. But for most people, stainless steel seems to work well. Another option is ceramic. The issue is that ceramic, often people confuse it with ceramic coated cookware. And that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to a solid piece of ceramic, similar to solid gold versus a piece of plated gold jewelry. So with plating or with coatings, the plating is very thin and it is not strongly attached to the metal. And it can actually get rubbed off or scratched off, flaked off over time. And then again, you run into similar issues with the Teflon where you have to replace them. And if it's being scratched, if it's cracked, we don't know if those ceramic coatings are releasing particles into our food. We don't know. There's just not enough study out there on them. But if you're looking into the three main types of cookware, again, cast iron, stainless steel, and pure ceramic, solid ceramic. Those would be my top three.
And then we need to consider what we're using to mix and stir within them, making sure we're not scratching. And making sure that those utensils aren't covered in toxins.
Exactly. A lot of people are using silicone cookware utensils. Silicone is problematic in and of itself because number one, it doesn't biodegrade. It's a man-made polymer as well. Yes, is it better than plastic? Sure. And the benefit that a lot of silicone manufacturers like to make is that it's plasticizer free. And plasticizers are endocrine disruptors, bisphenols and phthalates. So it's plasticizer free. Well, that's great. But they are also releasing cyclic silicones. And these are now under concern under the watch of the European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA. They have now voiced concerns about this as well. Cyclic silicones that can also have toxic effects. So we want to make the switch. And I understand it might not be a direct one-to-one going from, let's say, a nonstick pan with your silicone spatula, but pick one or the other if you can't do both. Optimally, you would change out the cookware and the utensils. And the better ones would be just wood. Wood would be great. Or metal. You can use metal in stainless steel and you can use metal in your cast iron as well.
And when it comes to wood, though, there can be different lacquers and coverings that we need to be aware of as well.
Right. You bring up a really good point because you can purchase a wooden utensil, but oftentimes it's coated in some kind of varnish or lacquer. We don't know if that's also being released into our food as we cook because the factors that increase the leaching and migration of chemicals, this is just a general sort of statement, are heat and acids. So what in the presence of heat and acid and fat, which is what is in most of our food, at least some combination of that, you will get some leaching of some sort at some level. We don't know if that's harmful or not, but if you want to choose a better option and you're able to find untreated wood, just bare wood, a bare wooden spoon, then that would be the optimal choice.
And what would you recommend to help preserve that, though, if it's just bare wood?
Yeah, you can actually just rub some of your oil on it. If you're using, let's say, coconut oil, I've used coconut oil on my wooden utensils and I haven't had any issues at all.
What about plates and bowls and things that we're putting the food into after it's cooked? Because mugs, like we're putting hot tea and coffee into mugs that have like a clear finish on it, along with our plates and bowls. Is there anything we need to be wary of in that realm?
There are some considerations to make. For example, we want to avoid putting our food on plastic. Simply because plastic is a soft material, it can flake off, it can break, crack, and it will break up into microplastics and nanoplastics. And so we don't want to put food on plastic and drinks. Let's avoid plastic. So what you've mentioned then are, let's say, ceramic plates and bowls. That's what most people are eating off of. There can be some issues there. It just really depends on the manufacturer. So optimally, you could look for a glass bowl or plate. That is the, I would say, optimal food contact material simply because it is non-leaching and it doesn't absorb odors, stains. It's pretty versatile other than the fact that it's breakable.
Okay. So for glasses, mugs, plates, bowls, glass is the best. I've often wondered though about that like clear finish that they put on plates and mugs and such.
Generally though, with those, they're fired in a kiln at high temperatures. So much higher than what we would encounter in our home. So the risk from that type of food contact is low.
Let's talk about cooking method. Barbecuing, there's frying. Obviously, frying we know in general isn't a good thing, but we have our food to start with, like we've talked about, quality. Then we have what we're cooking it in, and then we have cooking method. So let's talk about the array of cooking methods, even things like barbecuing and frying that I'm sure there's certain pros and cons in the barbecuing realm. I think frying would probably be pretty negative across the board. But let's talk about the spectrum of cooking methods and how you feel about those.
I really like how you've taken us on a progression from the type of food that we're cooking, how we're preparing it, the utensils we're using, how we're eating and enjoying and serving it. This is a really great way to illustrate this point, is that when we're cooking food and we have it in contact with a heat element, for example, in a frying pan, and you get the browning, you see browning around the edges of your food. That's called the Maillard reaction. What's happening there is that sugars are interacting with heat and then they are becoming brown, they're becoming caramelized. In this process, what we're getting is the formation of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. These are becoming more and more prevalent within the scientific community as being the basis for disease and aging. And so, with that said, it doesn't come as a surprise that if you're cooking something that's, you're searing it and you're getting this nice brown, crusty layer, it's the most delicious for a lot of people to eat that way. But unfortunately, it does come with that risk of the advanced glycation end products and the undesired effects of that. Even though we are cooking, let's say, a grass-fed, grass-finished steak, and it's the most high-quality piece of meat, there are different ways that you can prepare it to reduce the toxic formation of these advanced glycation end products. And that would be something like baking would be better than pan frying. Grilling, you've mentioned, that one is also one of the more higher risk methods of cooking, especially if you're cooking over charcoal. So charcoal in and of itself comes from the earth, but what we find in there is concentrated polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are carcinogens, naturally occurring. They're not man-made. They weren't added, in any type of processing. It's just the naturally occurring carcinogen in these charcoals. And so when you light them, and let's say you have a steak on the grill that's fatty, that fat drips down into the charcoal, which then burns and the smoke gets redeposited back onto that steak. That's the worst way to cook. If you are cooking a fatty piece of meat over charcoal, that's the worst way to cook. And if you're burning that meat over charcoal and you're consuming it, that's the worst. You see the smoke that's coming off, you can smell it, that burning smell, that charcoal smell. Unfortunately, that's the worst. That's the indicator of the worst way to cook. Then if you want to improve that, then maybe cook over a gas grill. That would be better for you than charcoal. And maybe leaner cuts of meat as opposed to fattier ones.
And I would assume deep frying. I was
Deep
referring
frying's
to
up
it
there
as
as
frying
well.
before, but that's got to be pretty bad.
Yes, deep frying is up there in the worst ways to cook as well, because you got to really control your ingredients. Your oil, is it oxidized? What type of oil are you using? Is it highly refined? Has it been treated with chemical solvents? Has it been bleached and deodorized? What oil are you using? Then if you're frying something that's rich in carbohydrates, then you're getting the formation of acrylamide, which is neurotoxic. So acrylamide is, again, also just in our foods, the way that we like to eat foods that were fried, that were even baked, breads, acrylamides in coffee as well. So I'm not saying don't eat these ever. I drink coffee every day, but we just want to look for coffee that has these contaminants and these byproducts at a lower level, as low as we can.
Let's move into the bathroom. A lot of products here that we're using on our skin, in our mouth. What do we need to be most cognizant of?
Well, let's be cognizant of what's going in our mouth, simply because the amount that gets absorbed through the oral cavity can be higher than you might think, because we have underneath the tongue what is known as sublingual absorption. So if you put certain medications, will tell you to put it under the tongue and hold it there for a little while, because there's a pretty high level of chemical absorption there. So we need to be careful with what we're putting in our mouths. For example, oral care products, toothpaste. What kinds of ingredients are we having in our toothpaste? If we're using something that has something irritating like sodium lauryl sulfate, this is a detergent. This is a surfactant. That's what's causing that foaming effect. So if you're brushing your teeth and you see all that foam, check your toothpaste ingredients for sodium lauryl sulfate. If you've got recurring canker sores, that can be linked to the sodium lauryl sulfate because there are studies showing that this ingredient destroys the oral mucosa, which is not a good thing. We need to keep our gums and our tissues healthy in order for oral health and overall health. So look out for that. And also the artificial colors, the dyes, the flavors, as well as fluoride as well.
How do you feel about mouthwash?
Mouthwash is not something that I personally use. And I've also seen several dental experts speak on this as well from a microbiome perspective. And I think this is something that we need to be careful of because once you are introducing something like alcohol, alcohol is a penetration enhancer. What that means is that it increases the penetration of chemicals across tissues, meaning on the skin, in the mouth, it increases the chemical penetration. It's a penetration enhancer. So if you're rinsing your mouth with alcohol, look at what else is in that mouth rinse. Are you, having all of these synthetic dyes and saccharin and flavors and colors and these undesirable, unnecessary ingredients in there? Then you might want to reconsider. If you have poor oral health, that's something you have to check with your dentist about. But it could also be an issue with the toxic absorption because of the ingredients.
What about dental floss? What do we want to look out for there?
Definitely look out for plastic dental floss that is coated. So these slippery glide type flosses, tapes, dental tape, I believe they're called. That's something to look out for because those were found to be coated with Teflon. Again, these PFAS chemicals. And you're going in between your teeth. Sometimes people floss more than once a day, multiple times a day over the course of a lifetime in a very vascularized area, meaning if there's an area of high blood flow, that means also high chemical absorption. So again, the mouth absorbs a lot of chemicals. So we need to be careful with the types of dental floss we're using, especially if you've got kids. So definitely look for my personal favorite type of floss is made with silk. I use silk floss that's coated in organic plant wax.
And what do you use for toothpaste?
Toothpaste, I switched to a hydroxyapatite toothpaste under the advice of my dentist, and it actually significantly helped improve my oral health. I was using fluoride-free toothpaste for some time, but didn't really feel like it was truly benefiting my teeth. It was just more of a I need to use toothpaste kind of thing. So I just got something the best that I could. But once I switched to a hydroxyapatite toothpaste, I did notice an improvement in my oral health.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that as well. Let's move into the shower. Things we're putting on our hair, on our body. What mistakes are we making there?
Yeah, let's think about what we're doing. So I'm going to paint the picture. When you get in the shower, you turn on the water. Let's say you're doing a hot shower. Your pores are open, your skin is hydrated. So what's increasing the rate of chemical absorption is the hydration status of your skin. If your skin's dry, it won't be absorbing as much as when it's hydrated and moist and wet in the shower. And then you've got the heat element, right? We mentioned heat. Anytime there's heat, there's also an increased rate of chemical transfer and absorption. So a hot shower, you're grabbing your shampoo, you've got your harsh surfactants, your fragrance chemicals in there. These are affecting your scalp health, your microbiome, as well as the fragrances with endocrine disruptors in them. You have a high amount of vascularization in the scalp as well. And scalp skin absorbs more chemicals than, let's say, the skin on your elbow. So when you're shampooing every day, yes, the product is rinse off. It's not sitting on the skin. That's also going to increase chemical absorption, but you're still getting absorption at some level. But that's not the only product you're using, right? Then you grab your conditioner. Let's say as someone who's got longer hair, you're putting your conditioner in. That's got also maybe some silicones in it. It's got some PEGs. These are petroleum derived ingredients. They can have formaldehyde in them. Then you're also having the fragrance chemicals again. So you're layering on top of one another these chemical exposures. Then you've got your body wash and your soap, and that's also scented and fragranced. And that's also affecting your skin health. And you're putting it all over your body. That's a large area. So the factors that are relevant when we look at chemicals and chemical exposure are the frequency, duration, the concentration, as well as the route of exposure. So for a lot of these, we're inhaling them as well as absorbing the chemicals through the skin. So these are not exposures that people think of necessarily as increasing your toxic burden, but they are.
So far, we've went over a number of different routes of exposure, one being inhaling. We talked about in the mouth, the mucosa and absorbing there. And then we've talked about the skin now and how when it's wet, it is more absorbent. What does the body have in these different areas, mechanisms to protect itself? And what areas are we more vulnerable in?
The general mechanism that we have of protection is the stratum corneum. That is the outer layer of the skin, the dry skin on the very surface. That is supposed to be our barrier from the outside world, keeping the inside inside and the outside outside. But unfortunately, a lot of these chemicals, like I mentioned, the alcohol is a penetration enhancer. It will affect the integrity of that barrier. So you're getting more chemical absorption. So you have to look at the types of products that you're using, where you're using it, how often how long are they staying on your skin? How old are you? If you're a child, then this toxic exposure is orders of magnitude higher risk than compared to an adult.
Does that again dip when somebody gets really old and they're a senior?
When you get older, then toxic absorption is it would be worse for vulnerable populations, for example, children and elderly. They're disproportionately affected simply because the body slows down as we age. So the mechanisms of detoxification that we have are reduced, right? When you're young, they're not fully developed. When you're an adult, then they are fully developed. And then when you get older into your elder years, then the rate of detoxification goes down again.
All right, let's stay in the bathroom. Coming out of the shower, let's talk about deodorant, skin creams, makeup, different things people put on the body before they get dressed.
Yeah, so people put your body lotion on. That's covering a large area again. It's sitting on the skin. So if something's sitting on your skin, it has the opportunity to become absorbed into your bloodstream until you wash it off, essentially. Then you're adding your deodorant. If you're a woman, then your lymph tissue and breast tissue are in almost direct proximity to your underarms. And depending on the type of deodorant you're using, it can be a high risk, like your conventional aluminum salt containing deodorants. These have aluminum salts that are physical blockers of your sweat ducts. And so what's going on there is that salt is getting lodged into your sweat duct and preventing sweat from coming out. Sweat is a detoxification pathway that we do not benefit from blocking. In fact, there are studies showing that when you induce sweat, that you're increasing the rate of detoxification of a lot of these chemicals of concern. Bisphenols, phthalates, heavy metals, pesticides. So we don't want to block our sweat. I understand it might not be comfortable for someone to have sweaty underarms. That's a whole different situation that we need to look at. But if you are long term using these antiperspirants with these aluminum salts, you could actually be increasing your odor. There's a study showing that with more use of these aluminum containing antiperspirants, the underarm odor actually got worse. So not only are you increasing your toxic load this way, but you could also be making the situation worse.
Is that because we're disrupting the microbiome there?
Yes, that's one aspect of it as well. Is the microbes in the underarm are what determine the odor. They're producing the odor. So if you're blocking them, then that's changing the composition of the population there.
All right, let's talk about makeup, different things people would put on their face, different cream there and products.
When it comes to makeup, this one is also a leave-on product. So you leave it on your face and it doesn't come off until you wash it. And generally, people apply daily. Let's take, for example, I'll walk through a typical routine. Let's say you put on your lotion, your skincare. Maybe you've got 5 products. I've seen even videos of people doing 8 to 12 step skincare routine, which is excessive in my opinion. I don't think you're really getting a lot of benefit there, but you're also getting increased toxic load. Let's say all those products, 12 products, have fragrances in them, have these PEGs in them, have these cyclic silicones in them, for example, these synthetic silicones. Are these benefiting your skin or are they making your skin worse? That's the question to ask yourself. If you're someone who's looking for topical solutions to improve your skin, then that's actually not going to serve you in the long term because skin health comes from within. Nonetheless, I digress from that. The amount of chemicals that are coming from beauty and skincare products, the Environmental Working Group estimates that the average woman is applying 168 chemicals to her skin daily. That's a pretty staggering number. If all of them, let's worst case scenario, if all of them have toxic concerns daily that you're not rinsing off, that are sitting on your skin, that have the opportunity to get absorbed into your bloodstream. And there are studies showing that people, and young girls especially, who use more beauty and personal care products have a higher load of endocrine disruptors in their bodies. But not just that, then they have these risks for increased risk for polycystic ovary syndrome, endometriosis, as well as early puberty, early menstruation. These are highly abnormal. These are clearly endocrine disrupting. This is not normal. So if you are struggling with these types of issues, look in your beauty and personal care product routine and eliminate as much as you can these fragrances.
And I'd have to imagine a challenge these days is that some of these companies are starting to get tuned in to what we're talking about today. And they're making products that are marketed toward being green, but might be total BS or only partway there. So, how big of an issue is that? And how do we go through and sort and find products that are actually clean and of value?
This is a big issue because greenwashing is what you're describing, which is basically the use of deceptive marketing to influence consumer behavior and increase the likelihood that you'll buy a product based on certain buzzwords. So companies, like you said, they're smart, they're tuning in, they're listening, they're watching social media, they're seeing what people are demanding, what are people asking for, and people are asking for cleaner, safer products. Unfortunately, the word clean is meaningless. There is no federal definition of clean. There is no federal definition of natural. So these buzzwords you'll see on the front of a bottle, oh, made from natural ingredients, plant derived, non toxic. That's also a buzzword. Who can substantiate that? None of these companies can because unless they've done the actual testing on them, which they haven't, they can't use this term, but they are because there's no repercussions for using these terms. There are no federal guidelines or regulations to bust them. Areas like the UK and different countries around the world, they are cracking down on the use of these marketing terms, but not yet in the US. So we need to be extra cautious and look at the ingredients list. That's how you know what's actually in your product. And again, like I mentioned, the fragrance doesn't tell you the whole story because you think the word fragrance seems innocuous. It's fragrance, whatever, it smells good. But we know there are phthalates in there. There are carcinogens in there. And these are hiding in plain sight.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no general standard certification or words that we can look for on packaging that'll let us know that it's clean.
One thing that you can look for is USDA certified organic. In other areas of the world, I've seen in Europe, the EcoCert, Cosmos EcoCert, that's one thing that can also help as well. But becoming familiar with the ingredients list itself is key to finding safe products. Simply because without this information, if you don't know what you're looking at, then you don't really know what you're buying. And that's the issue. But there are certain things like the certain verifications that you can look for. But again, you have to follow up with these companies and look at their standards to truly understand what this verification means. A lot of people think cruelty free means it's clean. It doesn't. That just means that it wasn't tested on animals, which doesn't have anything to do with safety at all.
Early in our conversation, you touched on textiles. Let's talk about clothing, bedding, materials that are in contact with our skin and what we need to be aware of there.
This is something that a lot of people are now waking up to, which is great. The type of textiles that we're bringing into the home are extremely important. Let's start with the ones that are most important, that's in contact with our reproductive area. So undergarments. So undergarments, we want to avoid synthetic textiles in general, but especially in these areas. Polyester, nylon, acrylic. You'll see a lot of recycled polyester tags on clothing. I've seen this a lot in stores, and it's a marketing tactic to make people, it's greenwash because it makes people believe that it is more eco-friendly or healthy, when in actuality, they're just made from recycled plastic bottles. So you're wearing plastic clothing. So when you wear polyester, nylon, and acrylic, for example, these are plastics. These are also treated with plasticizer chemicals, the same ones that are endocrine disrupting, because they are used to make the plastic moldable, soft, to turn the fibers into weavable state so that they can be made into clothing. So we need to watch out for that. And not only are the chemicals in direct contact with our skin, but also the textile itself breaks up into microplastics. So you're wearing a polyester shirt. Every time you move, every time that fabric is moved in any way, there is some microplastic release.
So, what are we looking for? Cotton, hemp, natural fibers, I assume?
Yes, natural fibers, ideally organic. So if you're looking for organic cotton, look for GOTS. That's the Global Organic Textile Standard, or the OCS, Organic Cotton Standard. You want to look for those types of certifications because, again, textiles, they're not necessarily tightly regulated either. So you want to look for these types of verifications to know, having a more assurance that you're getting an actual organic piece of cotton.
How about bamboo?
Bamboo is nuanced. So certain types of bamboo, like rayon, highly processed, can be produced with highly caustic materials that are toxic to the environment and also to workers. So rayon is considered semi-synthetic. It's not necessarily a natural fiber because it was altered in such a way with the heavy use of harsh chemicals to get it to change the state into being a wearable piece of fabric. Whereas something like a tensile lyocell, that is something that is made from wood pulp. That is more sustainable and then therefore considered a better option than rayon. Tencel lyocell, TENCEL. So that's something that is becoming more prevalent, and is also can be more sustainable in a lot of ways. So if you start looking into the research and researching different types of textiles, you'll see that certain ones like organic cotton will be more resource intensive, for example. So just have a look at that and compare between those few. You mentioned hemp. That's a great option. Linen as well. The linen can be a little bit stiff. You might find some linen cotton blends. Those are also great.
And I'd imagine a lot of what we're talking about here would transfer to bedding as well.
Yes, yes. Organic cotton bedding. There's a lot of options out there. You can find some even easily online. It's not out of reach like it used to be. I think it used to be much higher price. I think somehow the market price has come down, so it's become more affordable and more accessible, that you can find them on these major retailer websites as well, which is great.
And pillows, mattresses, we want to be aware of those as well and look for cleaner options.
Oh, 100%. So let's talk about mattresses first. So mattresses is what we lay on, we sleep. 30% of our lives are spent sleeping if you sleep around 8 hours a night. And babies can sleep up to 13 or 14 hours a day, which is a considerable portion of their lives. And let's look at the context of chemical absorption for them. So for a baby, their body weight is tiny, tiny, tiny. When they are exposed to chemicals, the rate of, let's say, distribution of the chemicals in their body per body weight is so much higher, up to 20 times higher than that of an adult, just based on body weight alone. So if I'm exposed to a chemical, but my baby is also exposed to the same chemical, my baby is going to have 20 times more of a toxic effect than me. So when we're looking at bedding materials, Polyurethane foams are the worst. Stay away from those. Those are the memory foams. If you've Whenever you open those packages, there is a chemical odor these are gases that are being released. Things like benzene, toluene, these toxic volatile organic compounds that have come up several times in our conversation. These are being released from these polyurethane foam mattresses as well as pillows. So if you want safer bedding options, ideally an organic cotton, wool. You can also find some organic latex as well. You want to look for something that doesn't have a lot of glues and adhesives because those are also releasing volatile organic compounds. So organic mattresses are optimal. Same with pillows. And pillows, I would even say, are worse than the mattress itself because it's in direct contact with your face and your breathing zone. So when you're sleeping on a polyurethane foam pillow, you're inhaling the fumes for hours and hours a night.
As you talk about glue, it got me thinking about furniture and some of the cheaper furniture out there, things like IKEA, where it's like pressed and glued wood that they're using for a lot of the pieces, I guess. What do we have to look out for there?
Yeah, you want to avoid MDF, multi-density fiberboard, these pressed woods, these plywoods, because what they're doing is they're taking leftover bits of wood and applying a glue type of substrate and pressing them to making a piece of solid wood again. But it's not the original solid wood that you would get if you cut down a tree. This is processed. Again, the more processing in going into any product this goes across the board for food, for furniture, for skincare, for all of these things. The more processed, the worse off you are. So these processed woods, these man-made woods, these are releasing formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen. And there's no telling how long these pieces off gas, meaning how long is the formaldehyde continuously being released.
For somebody that's going to bring something into the home, knowing that it's going to be off gassing and it's not going to be perfect for the air, and again, that's going to be in the dust and so on. What would you recommend to them to help with that process? Like, can they go put it out in the garage and leave it there to off gas for a couple of weeks? Does that even matter? Is it really going to make a difference? How can we go about in these situations making a bad situation a little bit better? Knowing, again, coming back to what we said earlier, things aren't perfect. We're doing the best we can with all of this. There's so many different areas we've touched on, and we could easily get very stressed out worrying about each and every one of these areas and cause a detriment to our health in the stress realm from that.
Yes, I would recommend if you have furniture going into your child's room, then this would be more of a concern for a child or a baby. So for example, when you get baby furniture, if you're getting a crib, then do your best there to protect your children's health because they have years, they're decades more to live. And early life exposures can have health consequences that carry on into adulthood. So if you're someone that's like, hey, I've been around for a while, I'm not so concerned about myself, well, look into what you're bringing into your child's room. That would be something that would then take the load off, so to speak, from the stress of having to do an overhaul. I don't recommend anyone doing an upheaval and overhauling their entire home in one go, unless the situation calls, which is really rare. I don't ever think there's a situation for that. But if you are getting a piece of furniture, put it in your garage, let it off gas, let it be outside for a while if you can, if you have the option to. If not, then just do the best you can. If that piece of IKEA furniture was the only thing that you could get, so be it. Try to keep your windows open. Try to mitigate the release of pollutants from other sources, like we mentioned, the candles, the scented products, so on.
Let's talk diapers. I know you've done a whole video on this and gone extensively into the details of all the different types and brands. What do people want to look for when they're buying a diaper to keep it clean?
Diapers are a big issue for your child's health, especially because they wear them immediately after they're born. So starting from after birth, if you choose diapers, some parents don't even choose to wear diapers, put diapers on their kids at all. This is something that is relatively a new concept to me, but is probably not a new concept to people around the world. But nonetheless, if you choose to put diapers on your child, then there are several issues to be concerned with or thinking about when you're choosing a diaper, because these diapers are made out of synthetic materials. Most of the diapers on the market are made from petroleum derived plastics. Again, plastic, plasticizer chemicals, endocrine disruptors, that is the main concern. Also, the absorbent gel on the inside of the diaper can also be a concern, as well as the print on the diapers. So I did a very deep investigation into diapers that were marketed as non-toxic, because this again is an issue for parents who are looking for safer options and getting confused because of all the marketing going on. So I did a deep investigation. I contacted 30 brands. Unfortunately, only 3 of them even replied. Many of them did not reply with any sort of additional information than what was on their website. Nonetheless, what you should be looking for are diapers that are made with as few or as little petroleum derived plastics, little to no print or dyes on there as possible, and try to avoid the color indicator. There's a line on there that will show you if it's wet, right? It'll turn blue if it's wet. And that's helpful for parents to know if the diaper's wet. Is it entirely necessary? No, because our ancestors got by with not even using disposable diapers at all. But disposable diapers are a newer invention, very convenient, but again, come with risks. So look for diapers that are low in petroleum derived plastics, as few prints as possible. And if you can, get away from the colored indicator. That would be the recommendation for diapers. However, an even better option would be to use organic cotton reusable diapers. This would require more water because you have to wash them. However, from a health perspective, then the benefit is clearly there from a chemical exposure perspective.
All right, well, that's a good segue into laundry and cleaning of our textiles, our clothing, and our bedding and diapers if we're going to go that route. What do we want to look for soap wise that we put into the washing machine that's not containing chemicals?
Most laundry detergent out there contains these similar toxic chemicals, unfortunately, to what we've been already talking about, these harsh surfactants. They use optical brighteners to make your clothes look brighter and cleaner. So it's this artificial blue dye that is put into the detergent, as well as the fragrances. And then these preservatives that can be highly irritating and sensitizing, causing allergic reactions. And when we have these laundry detergents in our clothing, they don't actually get fully rinsed out. There's studies that show that they are not fully rinsed out even after a complete cycle. So be really mindful of the amount and the type of laundry detergent that we're using. We want to look for surfactants that are biodegradable, that don't bioaccumulate in the environment, that don't harm the ecosystem, that aren't harming our microbiome, that aren't impairing our skin barrier integrity, that aren't causing all of these allergic reactions in people, because these are sitting against our skin, coming in contact with our entire body, as well as our reproductive organs, right? We want to look out for that. So look for more biodegradable, plant-derived surfactants and fragrance-free if you can. And if you're someone who really loves scent, then you can add some essential oil to your wash.
All right, let's pivot into cleaning materials in general, using sprays and different things to clean, countertops and bathrooms. And what do we want to look for there?
We want to look for similar ingredients. So these plant-derived surfactants are not as harsh or as concerning as, let's say, a toxic solvent. So a lot of these cleaning products, if you've ever looked on the bottle, most do not list what the ingredients are, which is obviously a huge concern, because if we don't know what's in there, how do we know if it's impacting our health? They don't even need to disclose the ingredients. And some of them even have hazard warning statements on them. So if you see a cleaning product with a hazard statement on it, I would highly recommend avoiding that. That's something that you don't want to risk your health with necessarily. You can clean your home with simple solutions of vinegar and water. That has actually been shown to kill E. coli in some cases. But is it compatible with every surface in your home? Not necessarily. So you'd have to look that up. Cleaning sprays, same thing. You want just look for these plant derived surfactants that are more gentle and fragrance free. That's the key because the fragrances are volatilizing even when you're not using the product.
Another area we should discuss too is the soaps that we're using to clean dishes. And if we have a dishwasher, the soap we put in there as well, because that's going to obviously leave a residue on the dishes we're using and putting our foods on.
Yeah, we definitely want to look out for those because, like you said, the risk is ingestion of these residues, right? And while the word residue for some people might seem innocuous, there have actually been studies showing that the residues from dishwasher detergents can disrupt the gut microbiome. So they are being ingested at levels high enough to be of concern. So when you're looking for dishwasher detergents and dish soap, similar issues. Again, these products are pretty much the same as your laundry detergent with maybe a few changes in the ingredient substitutions, but generally speaking there's a surfactant that's going to help dissolve the fats and break down the fats so that you can remove grease and whatnot. It's the same. So again, look for these plant-derived materials. Look for these sustainable materials. My personal favorite for dish soap is a solid dish soap so that we can remove the plastic element from our dishwashing and cleaning routine. And a lot of these companies actually make concentrated solid dish soap that you then can use as similar to a bar soap. So just, take my brush, scrub it on the solid dish soap, use it to scrub my dishes. Dishwasher, they make powders. I would stay away from any of the dishwasher tablets that are wrapped in plastic. That plastic material doesn't fully break down. Are we ingesting some of it? Who knows? I don't want to be eating the plastic. I don't recommend eating that. So stay away from those if you can. Maybe look for ones that don't have the plastic wrap. They do have solid tablets as well as powders. So similar ingredients. The classical soap ingredients would be saponified oil. So for example, you'll see something like a uh, sodium cocoate. That word, the ATE at the end, that kind of indicates the type of ingredient that it is. So you can look some of these ingredients up and they do make more sustainable solid as well as concentrates that you can just then dilute at home. So it removes that plastic element from the product lifeline. That is also very important too because the ingredients in a product are extremely important for our health. But the plastic bottles that they come in are also important because those end up in landfills, break up into microplastics, and that's what's infesting and polluting our water, our air, soil. Again, we want to get away from single use plastic if you can. When it comes to skincare, hair care, all your beauty products, try to look for more sustainable packaging as much as you can. And for laundry as well as home cleaning products too.
And you mentioned the environmental piece with the plastic bottles. You'd have to imagine a lot of the plastic is going to leach into the product itself that we put on and in our bodies and cause disruption on an individual level as well.
100%. In fact, this goes back again to food packaging as well. So, with food packaging, there was a study that came out showing that oils like olive oil, acidic foods like ketchup that were contained in plastic bottles actually had leaching of PFAS. So, some plastic bottles, I believe it's the largest manufacturer of plastic in North America, was fluoridating the plastic containers to make them more durable. So, what happens is the formation of PFAS chemicals in plastic containers that were then leaching into olive oil and ketchup. Those are just some examples. And who knows how long we've been ingesting these.
Which takes me to somebody that's been on the planet now for a number of decades, or it really doesn't matter the timeline, somebody that's taken in and taken these chemicals on their body over a period of time, what do we do to detoxify and get back to a baseline? Obviously, we want to make the changes like we talked about today to the best of our ability to prevent further accumulation. But what do we do to clean the body up and get back to a baseline?
I love this question because a low tox lifestyle, or one where we seek to reduce our toxic burden, isn't only about avoidance, but there's two pieces, right? Number one is avoidance, right? We want to avoid as many exposures as we can, but we can't avoid them all. So, what do we do with the amount that we can't avoid? Well, we want to support our body's detoxification processes. We have built in detoxification, otherwise, we would be dead. However, with that said, those detox pathways are definitely getting burdened in a lot of people, overtaxed to the point where there's excess that the body cannot deal with. In those cases, increased risk of diseases like cancer, reproductive issues like infertility, PCOS, endometriosis, with all of these extra exposures that our body can't handle, we need to increase our capacity to detoxify. So what does that mean? We have built-in detoxification like glutathione. Glutathione is known as the master antioxidant, but that name literally does not do it justice. That one single molecule that our body makes, our livers and kidneys make glutathione. These glutathione molecules detoxify heavy metals, they detoxify free radicals, chemicals that we're exposed to, things like cigarette smoke, alcohol consumption, and acetaminophen use can actually deplete our glutathione. So, in a healthy lifestyle, we want to remove those factors so that we're not stealing glutathione away from ourselves. And also increasing our ability to make more glutathione through diet and lifestyle.
So, what I'm hearing you say there, you want to minimize exposures like we've been talking about. So, we're not wasting glutathione. And then there's diet and lifestyle things we can do to ramp it up, which I'll have you get into
Absolutely.
now.
Yes. I'm so happy to talk about this because most people hear glutathione and they think, I should supplement. That shouldn't be the first thing that you do because some people most people make enough glutathione. It's just that our lifestyle robs ourselves of the glutathione that we have. But you can increase the amount that you make through your diet and lifestyle. So avoiding the cigarettes, minimizing alcohol consumption and acetaminophen use, and then also increasing your consumption of sulfur-containing foods. Glutathione is made out of 3 amino acids: glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. Cysteine contains sulfur. If you have enough sulfur in your body, you can make glutathione. So what foods are rich in sulfur? Meat, eggs, dairy products, sulfur-rich vegetables like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, broccoli sprouts have a high amount of sulforaphane. This is a very rich source of sulfur. Garlic, onions. You can increase your glutathione with matcha green tea, with berries, lots of different ways to increase glutathione through the diet. So remember, if you remove the sources of toxic exposure from your lifestyle as much as possible, so the avoidance piece, then you increase your consumption of sulfur-rich foods, you can increase your glutathione production. Simply be just the balance, because our bodies can also recycle glutathione. So I don't want people to think that, I just got to get more. I got to get more. Well, you already have some, and you have ways to recycle glutathione too. So as long as you're not adding more toxins to your body, then that recycling system is functioning optimally. That's what we want. We don't always need to add more. And I think that's the trap that a lot of people fall into is, let me just grab that glutathione supplement and I'm good to go. Well, you're not addressing the root cause. The root cause is your lifestyle and your diet.
Okay, but say somebody is going to take on a lot of what we said today and they want to speed the process up of cleaning their body. Would you say glutathione as a supplement could be good in the short term as they're making the switches, as they're cleaning up their body? I'm just curious what role you think supplementation plays, even if it's just temporarily.
Yeah, Temporary is better than long term. It's not necessarily meant to be a long term fix because, again, if you are someone who is maybe you have a genetic predisposition to having low glutathione, well, that's something you need to do a test for. Have your doctor test for that, test your glutathione levels, work with someone if you need to. But I highly recommend it's very individualized with supplementation. You've got to work with someone who can actually measure your levels. So let's say you want to there's some studies showing that when you supplement with glutathione, it can help with your athletic performance, right? If you're using it maybe in a certain way, it just depends on how you're using it. If you're someone who's just like, oh, well, I've got a high toxic load, let me just throw a bunch of glutathione at it, that might not actually be the answer for you. So you've got to work with your healthcare provider to discover what the needs are and how to actually go about it. Because this is not meant to be a detox protocol, quick fix type of thing. Again, the toxic burden is built up over time because of our diet and lifestyle. So once you sort of, like you said, okay, maybe I'm not feeling so great. Maybe I want to try to do some supplementation. There is a time and place for that as well, but it's highly individualized. So I don't think it's necessarily a wise piece of advice to give people to tell them to run out and get a supplement. I think you should really work with your healthcare provider to determine your unique individual needs.
Okay, if somebody decides a supplement of glutathione is right for them, maybe even temporarily, what type do you recommend?
Liposomal glutathione. That is glutathione in whole form, but it's encapsulated in a liposome or a type of fat so that it can increase the absorption because our bodies cannot absorb whole glutathione. Our cells need special transporters to actually bring glutathione into the cell where it can be active. And that is very, I would say, it's ineffective, it's inefficient. So supplementing with whole glutathione outside of liposomal form doesn't work. Other ways can be N-acetylcysteine, which is a precursor to glutathione. But given that some people have a genetic predisposition to having lower enzymatic activity to make glutathione, reduced capacity to make glutathione, then providing the NAC precursor won't really help either. So that's why it's individualized. Because if you don't have the genetic predisposition to having reduced glutathione capacity, then the NAC would work. Maybe. But if you it's kind of a toss up. That's why it's so highly individualized because the genetic polymorphism can be up to 25% of the population.
All right, so diet supplements aside, if somebody wants to help support their body in making glutathione, can they do certain types of exercise or other lifestyle things in that realm?
Yes, absolutely. So stress management is key. That's one that's going to affect your overall health, but it also has effects rooted with glutathione as well. Aerobic and strength training. So aerobic and weight bearing exercise have been shown to increase glutathione production in people, as well as adequate sleep. And again, avoiding the really toxic stuff like the cigarettes, that's going to do you a world of good, as well as excess alcohol consumption. So the things that we know to deplete glutathione, those are the ones that we want to avoid. And then we want to add in these sulfur-rich foods to support glutathione balance, as well as increase our body's capacity to make more, which is the exercise component of it. We really need to keep the body moving in order to get that optimal level of glutathione.
How do you feel about saunas and other lifestyle modalities to help with detox?
Sauna, specifically infrared sauna, has been studied. I don't know for a fact that the Finnish or steam sauna, I don't know if it would have the same effect, but basically, if you sweat, induce sweating, then you're increasing your capacity to detoxify environmental chemicals. There was a series of studies conducted by one group that showed increased amount of excretion through the sweat of heavy metals, persistent organic pollutants like PCBs, as well as organophosphate pesticides, plasticizer chemicals, BPA, phthalates. So a lot of these chemicals that we've been speaking about today can be excreted through sweat. So even just if you don't have a sauna, just get moving, get sweating as much as you can. I think that's the key takeaway here.
And for somebody who's coming into this feeling like they've lived a pretty conventional life, probably built up a lot of toxins over the years, is there a certain test you recommend to get kind of a picture in the beginning where we're at with toxins in the body? And then something we could do periodically to make sure we're expelling them?
Yeah, there are actually a number of tests out there. So if you work with, let's say, a functional or integrative practitioner, they have a number of tests that they can run. There's also a consumer based test called the million marker that you can do for yourself just to get a snapshot. Like you said, just let me have a look at my exposures. And there might be something in there that surprises you. And you might be, having a higher level of phthalates than you thought. Oh, well, I've removed phthalates, but I still have them. So then that gives you a clue on where else to look in your daily routine, in your home, and your lifestyle that could be contributing this extra source that you didn't think about. So there are some useful consumer tests, I believe, like the million marker that could be interesting. But again, I wouldn't want to misinterpret these in results, because once you get the results, you're probably going to want to work with someone to pinpoint the source so that you can actually get rid of it.
And since for a lot of people, toxins have been building up in the body over a long period of time, do you recommend if somebody realizes that they're toxic and they're going to start to support glutathione, maybe get in the sauna, start to really detox their body, should they do that slowly as to not overwhelm the body as they're cleaning things out?
Yes, I think you should take it slowly. And what I did personally was start with the avoidance piece. So, avoiding further toxic exposure by swapping out my products. Then was taking a step back and seeing where I'm at. How do I feel? Do I still have some issues there? What could I do to further optimize my situation? And then if you get into a sauna, let's say you go too hard too fast, you can actually get a detox reaction. So once the liver and kidney maybe do a purge of toxins at once, that will overwhelm the system and you can get headache, migraines, you can get some skin rashes. It's not a good situation to be in, but at the same time, you can support your body through that period with increasing your water consumption. So make sure your water is filtered properly so it can remove contaminants. You're not adding more back in. Drink a lot of water, get a good amount of rest, try to get as much whole foods in your body at that time to provide the nutrients for your body to make the glutathione. There are even products out there such as charcoal binders that can help as well. But again, talk to your doctor because these might not be for everyone.
I was actually going to bring up charcoal. I'm wondering if there's other products as we're detoxing that can support the body. Anything else that we haven't mentioned in that realm?
Not that I can think of. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Before we part ways, I want to take it back to food. And we talked about fragrance before and how there's so many different things that can fall under that category and be hidden there. Within the natural health realm, a lot of health products that we're ingesting have natural flavors. So let's talk about what that umbrella term means and what we can do to understand our quote unquote healthy products better.
Natural flavors can be very confusing for a lot of people, similar to fragrances. And more people are aware of flavors than they are of the issue with fragrances. And with flavors, of course, we're consuming them. So there is the risk over time that these can have undesired effects. With that said, I worked in the flavor industry, flavor and fragrance industry as a toxicologist. I saw all the flavor formulations. I saw many formulations. I know what type of processing goes into them, the raw materials. For the most part, at least the company I worked for, natural flavors did actually come from natural sources. It wasn't a fake umbrella term. Some people believe this to be true, and I can't say across the board that it isn't true, but from what I've seen, natural flavors tended to come from actual food sources. However, they don't have to. So for example, vanilla flavor can come from wood ash. You can synthesize vanillin, which is the active component of vanilla, that's what imparts the vanilla flavor, you can make it from all different kinds of sources. It doesn't have to even come from food. So that is an issue there because we don't know what other contaminants are coming along with it. And not to mention flavors themselves are typically highly processed. Again, anytime we're processing, this is creating some level of undesired byproducts and contaminants. Not only that, the flavors are changing the way that we perceive food. That is a big problem because if we consume a lot of flavored products, do we even remember what real food tastes like? And does it change our preference and brain chemistry to desire the flavored product versus the actual food itself? That is a question. That is something that for me is more concerning than the actual chemical composition of the flavor itself. Is the fact that it's changing our food preferences. But nonetheless, with natural flavors, people can be highly concerned because of the unknowns. They are used at such a small level in the food to impart flavor because they also use flavor enhancers like MSG. So is it the actual flavor chemicals that are causing the issue, or is it the flavor enhancers and the flavor blockers like bitter blocking chemicals? Those are also in use. So for example, if you look at your food, are you eating processed food? Because that's where the flavors are found. When I look at food, I'm not really concerned about the flavor itself. I'm more concerned about whether or not it's processed. So if you generally avoid processed food, you can avoid flavors. But if you can't, let's say in a supplement, in the case of a supplement, look at the overall benefit to risk ratio. Is this a high quality supplement? Is the flavor really coming from food or not? What's in that flavor? And a transparent company will tell you what's in the flavor. You can ask. If they don't tell you, then that is something that you might also take pause with. However, again, if it is something that is the rest of the product is really high quality and you've gained benefit from it, does that amount of flavor really make a difference? That's something you have to ask yourself. But if you're consuming flavored foods regularly, that means you're consuming processed foods. And that's more of an issue than the flavor itself, in my opinion.
Okay. For somebody that's tuned into this point, maybe they're feeling sort of overwhelmed with all the different nuance we got into. What would you say as a starting point you'd recommend to somebody? Maybe two or three areas that we talked about that have the biggest impact on health to get the ball rolling.
I love this question because if this is your first time ever hearing about environmental toxins, environmental pollution, you might want to hide from this information because if you've been living this way for decades, like I did before I actually started to consider these exposures, then it can be really overwhelming and daunting. So if you start somewhere, start simple, one thing at a time, one foot in front of another. I would say the number one thing, filter your water. Get rid of the plastic water bottles that you're drinking. The health impact, the environmental impact are astronomically negative compared to investing in a purifier, a water filter at home. Get yourself clean water. You don't necessarily need an air purifier, right? You can stop burning candles, stop doing incense, cook better to reduce indoor air pollution creation. But with water, the only option is really to filter. So get a water filter, eat whole foods, and avoid fragrances. Those are the top three.
Okay. And for somebody who at this time doesn't have the money to invest in, say, like an RO system, are there any of those pitcher filters that are relatively cheaper and easier to get that actually do a good job of cleaning the water? Obviously, like we talked about before, it's going to depend on where you live and what specific contaminants are in your water. But any specific brand you could recommend when it comes to pitchers to get people started?
There are a couple out there. I would look for a company that actually publishes the filter performance, the water quality test. That's the only way to really know if it's actually doing its job. And one company I found that actually does that is Epic Filters. So that's one company that makes pitchers. You can go on their website and actually look up the performance test report, and it'll show you how much of a particular contaminant was removed with their filter.
Because I could see how another issue with what we've talked about today is if people are buying, say, we'll use the water filter example here, and they're getting a less than satisfactory product, they could give themselves a false sense of security, which could do damage over the years. Say they're investing in a water pitcher that's just, greenwashing and not really doing a lot.
Right. This is really important because most of the filters that are sold in stores are not effective at removing the contaminants that we're really concerned with, like the PFAS, the heavy metals, and so on. Those are the most hazardous contaminants that we need to remove from our water. So if you're getting unfortunately, these widely available cheaper filters from the store, they're not doing their job. They're not doing what you think they are.
And we could extrapolate that to air and different areas as well. You got to make sure you're getting the quality and seeing the results, ideally seeing the test results that you're getting a quality product.
Right. That's how you can really make an educated and informed decision, is by reaching out to these companies. If you're looking to make an investment, try to get the best quality that you can. You might not get top of the line for your budget, but you want to try to get the best that you can for your money, right? We don't want to waste our money and get something that's subpar, providing a false sense of security, not doing its job, and then could be even doing the exact opposite.
All right, Dr. Yvonne, I really appreciate the conversation. We covered a lot and gave people a lot to think about. We're going to link up your social media, your website, everything in the show notes. And I just want to thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
Now that you're finished, you're going to want to stick around here and catch my chat with Dr. Shade. He'll teach you how to protect yourself from our toxic world. You don't want to miss this. I'll see you over there.
Detoxification doesn't have to feel bad. In fact, it should feel good. You can't get away from everything, so you really need to prioritize.